What's going on, everybody? And welcome to another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I am your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. And today I have Bethany Coleman with me. She is the Director of Event Management at the Institute of Internal Auditors. And her background stems with companies like Sensormatic, World Fuel, Citrix, Tyco in the event management, event marketer roles. Bethany, welcome.
Hi, it's great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Thank you for taking time with us today. So we're going to talk a ton today about kind of negotiating with hotels, right, Bethany? Because it's a big thing that's going on right now. And essentially there's an uptick in events. Event marketers, event managers are going back to these hotels to set up their internal and their external events. So we're going to talk a good bit on that today. And then we're also going to touch on some general event marketing tactics, strategies. Bethany has executed some very large trade show exhibits, events, activations, and things of that sense. So we're really going to brush into that as well today. Bethany, tell me a little bit about your current role with the Institute of Internal Auditors.
So I'm the Director of Event Management at the Institute of Internal Auditors, as you mentioned. My role in this case primarily focuses on the logistics of large, complex conferences that are held primarily in North America, but we do have some that are held outside of the US. So we do work globally as well.
Very cool. So one thing that I always like to ask people that are executing these events, whatever they may be, is one of my things is like, what's your biggest struggle? What's something that, what do you struggle with?
Well, I think there's a few things post-COVID that would come to mind. It's not any one thing, but one thing is it is very hard to find space right now, where we typically would have had no problem getting multiple offers from venues in cities across the US. We are actually struggling to get the right kind of space at the right sort of hotels and in the cities that we prefer. So that's a big problem. And I think the other thing is post-COVID is the slow or erratic return to live by our audiences, for example. So we've been trying to go back into live events since the end of 2021, and it's been a slow climb. Although I will say we just held our largest North American event of the year just a couple of weeks ago, and the in-person attendance was huge, and it really was very exciting to see it returning to pre-COVID numbers of weekly registrants. That was something that we weren't seeing before.
That's great. I mean, good to see something like that, right? Like what a good sign heading that direction. In terms of the hotel space, why so complicated to find hotel space? What's happening there?
There's so much competition. Like you were saying, there are a lot of these small events that people are, or any events that people are trying to get back into being in person. So there's a huge amount of demand. The other thing is the hotels, because of that demand, they can be pickier about the events that they take. They can increase their room rates substantially, way over what you think or what we might think is acceptable to our attendees and something they can get approved for travel. So it's kind of a little bit of a catch-22 situation. There's a feast at the moment for hotels who were in a terrible state of distress due to COVID, and many of them, in many cities having to be closed down primarily for a long, long time. They're trying to make up those numbers again.
Interesting, that kickback, right? Like how it comes back around and
yeah, for sure.
Everyone's trying to make back that money. Everybody's trying to get back in a position as quickly as they can. Interesting. I didn't know that was going on. I knew just from talking to a lot of our clients, a lot of the requests that are coming in, running this show and talking to people, that these small to medium and large events, micro events, summits, conference, whatever you want to call it. People are hosting them. People are looking to have them host them and get people to them. So interesting to see that hotels are an issue to get. Before an event, right? Maybe say like the weeks leading up to it. What keeps you up at night? What are you worried about?
A lot, for us right now, it's been kind of a little bit of a struggle to work with attrition, work with our attrition clauses in our contracts, because as I said, it's been kind of a slow climb out of the COVID-19, companies had travel restrictions, or, people were still concerned about coming back into events. And our contracts were primarily signed post-COVID. So I have contracts on the books through 2026. And some of them are cancellation and rebooks because of COVID, but many of them were original contracts that were negotiated and signed based on history post-COVID and based on, the post-COVID agreements that we had. So that's been something that definitely keeps me up.
And is that something, do you think that is really just because of a post-COVID, or you think it's because something that would have kept you up in the past, or just now?
Well, I hate attrition. What good event planner doesn't hate attrition, right? Like, I don't want to pay for something I didn't get. So
that's a good one. Let's switch to something better. What is in events, what's your biggest accomplishment? And if you could describe it to us or give us a little bit of detail on it.
Oh, geez. Biggest accomplishment in my entire career of 30 odd years.
Yeah.
You know what?
You've done cool stuff.
I have a few, but if we're going to stay in the vein of negotiation, I would say it was quite a few years ago with a previous company. And we had a sourcing agency that negotiated a contract for us and agreed to a very, very high F&B minimum that, based on our numbers, we should never have signed that contract. We should never have agreed to it. And I will have to admit, I was the final person to read the contract other than our lawyer, and did not pick up on that until the contract was signed and returned. But I was able to negotiate with the hotel that it was being held at, and the wonderful salesperson that I worked with at that time, to drop it down by about 80%. So,
wow.
if we're going to stay in the negotiating conversation, then that's probably one of the best.
That's a big number. I mean, yeah. I mean, it could have been anything, but I think that's a good thought. I mean, we're talking negotiation, we're talking hotels and event managers, right? So 80%, how did you do that? How did you get them to come down?
So we did a lot of business with this hotel. So we were able to, remind them of that relationship, and that we really placed most of our sales meetings and smaller customer meetings with them. We probably did 3 to 4 meetings with them a year. And it's regular business. You're not chasing that business. The business is always coming to you. And that, it was important to them and to us to maintain that relationship. And really, it was that appeal to the relationship.
I think that's great. I mean, I think that is like totally reasonable, in the sense, it's like, you're not pushing your weight around. You're just being like, hey, look, if we made a mistake, or we missed something, or we didn't catch it, like, this isn't an aha gotcha thing. This is a relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I think asking for that, and I think even better that they came through and we're like, yeah, sure, look, we get it, no problem. That would make me want to work with people more, right?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good stuff. What is your philosophy for executing a great event?
Well, obviously all the details matter, right? All of them do. But I think I've said this to people who I've worked with before, or, who have reported to me, is, don't sweat the small stuff, but small details really do matter, and they really make a difference. So, you can get caught up in the minutia of an event, and maybe some of those things that you're getting caught up in, those rabbit holes you go down, they are not important. But what is important are the small touches that make your guests feel important, and make your speakers feel like they're well cared for, and make, maybe the hotel staff understand that, you want to work with them, and that they are very important to the execution of your event, right? Everybody, the person who takes out the trash, the person who cleans tables, the wait staff, the electrical staff, the AV staff. I mean, they are all going to touch the customer experience of people who are attending your event.
That is such a good answer, that for me, that's like life advice, right? So telling somebody, don't sweat the small stuff, but the details matter.
Mhm.
Right. I love this one because not to make it about me, but one of the core values at my company is the details matter.
Yeah.
Because every little inch, the detail, you can't ignore details, right? That's how
Mhm.
great things come to fruition. But don't sweat the small stuff is like a stress thing. It's a
Yep.
thing that like things will go wrong. Things will happen.
Yes.
And how you react and how you control your emotions when they do will dictate what those outcomes will be. I think that's incredible advice, especially for your team. That's really good stuff. And good for any event marketers, any event managers, anybody in this spot listening and putting events on. It's a good
Mhm.
philosophy. Okay, let's get to some of this negotiation stuff, right? So walk me through the process of negotiating a micro event. Again, all these terms, summit, conference, internal, external. There's so many names for events these days. What's that process like?
So, I mean, all events have the same basic steps, right? Everything you need the specs from your stakeholders on what their meeting is. You need to understand the program so that you can request the right amount of meeting space. You need to understand how many people are expected to attend so you can understand, so you can request the right number of rooms in the right pattern. Because remember, the hotels ask us to have a crystal ball, right? Like, how many sleeping rooms are you going to have on this particular day? Oh, yes, I see it now. I'm going to have 50 on day one and 100,
Yeah.
it's very difficult. And so
Yeah.
that kind of forecasting is tough, right? But of
Yeah.
course, the main thing is to, one, you have to get the right specs from your stakeholders. You have to understand everything so you can start sourcing. My team here is very small, and so we do use a sourcing agency to help us. We work very closely with our legal team as well. My legal team and we created a brand new addendum for our contracts, so that's something that we show to the hotels up front so they can see what our main requests are. It lists concessions and walking our clients because the hotel is oversold, or what's attrition going to look like, or it's about 5 pages long. I mean, it covers a lot of things, and that's something that we then work with the hotels with, and they of course have their legal review it. And nobody's accepting everything, but it's a really good starting point, and it's a really good way to level set the conversation.
So in that negotiation with the hotel, right? When you have this addendum where you're saying like, hey, these are some things that we need here. What are you budging on? What are you not budging on? And what's kind of like advice for other event managers, marketers who are, doing this negotiation on those terms?
Something for us that has become a true, I would say, deal breaker at this point is our ability to bring in our own audiovisual company. So a third-party audiovisual company, and not have to use the in-house preferred audiovisual company.
You mean Encore?
It could be any. I mean, they are the biggest player, but they're not the only player.
They're huge.
Right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But so, for example, some of the contracts we have are basically that we can bring our own third party for general session, but we have to use the in-house for any breakouts, or like any kind of theater in the exhibit hall that we might have. And that we tried to play within those parameters, but it's really become obvious that that's very difficult, and that the service levels we're getting are not the service levels that we receive or expect from that vendor. Because I mean, that is a make or break for your conference, right? That is the most as well. In addition to food, the two most obvious things that your attendees interact with are food and audiovisual, right? It's the experience of sitting in the session room. So that has been written into our addendum that we do not have to do that. We no longer have to do that. We will pay a fee if it's necessary to pay a fee, but we must have the opportunity and I would say the privilege of bringing in our own vendor that we are the customer of. Because remember, the preferred vendor in-house the true customer preferred vendor in-house is the
It's
hotel.
the hotel. Yeah, it's a great
and
point.
not you.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, if there's certain parameters that the hotel tells them they have to stay within, that's what they're doing. And,
without a doubt.
the other thing we found is where our preferred vendor will bring in experts in lighting and experts in sound and experts in camera work, because all of our events are hybrid as well. So there's a lot of streaming going on and expertise in bandwidth and all of that. And we have a project manager who comes on site and calls our show and manages everything. He's been working with us for years and years and years. He knows all of our leadership. He knows even many of our attendees and many of our speakers who might speak more than once over the time that he's been with us. It's very important that that relationship for us is maintained and that we are the client.
It's really good. I like that one a lot. What's another one? Maybe it's not a deal breaker like that one is right now, but what other ones are important to you that, when you see that red line come back, you're like, So
a new one for us as well, and is related to attrition, which we touched on a little bit ago. So since I've been doing, as I mentioned, I've been doing this for like 30 years. In the old days, back in the day, if I wanted an audit, the hotel would send me all of the data. And I could cross-reference it against my registration list, right?
Okay.
So I could parse the registration list any way I wanted. I was doing it manually. I didn't have to put it in a specific format that then got put into the computer system. And if it doesn't find it because the format's not exact, or, sometimes people spell they might put their name in all lowercase, or they might put their full name, right? Like, say my name is Robert. I might put Rob on my conference registration because that's what I want on my badge. But when I book the hotel, I put Robert because Robert is what's on my driver's license.
Yeah.
Right. And they're going to ask for ID when I check in. So, the hotels are not checking in that fine detail that I could do when I was able to do it myself. Now, of course, we have so much data protection, understandably, so they can no longer share that anymore. So one thing we've written in is that we can have up to 3 audits if we're not satisfied with the audit that is done, and one of them should be manual. So it's not just that their computer system is doing it, it's that a person has to do it.
And that whole thing, correct me if I'm wrong, that's really a data thing, right? In terms of like the outcome of what you're looking for, which when it comes to events is so important. I mean, it is that first party data that you are getting by being the event host, the creator, everything is so valuable moving forward for marketing your event, for so many different reasons. So I think that's another great one. It's really good. Anything else in that negotiation process? Let's say I'm an event marketer, event manager, right? And I've been doing it a couple of years. I've hosted maybe 10, 12 events. I think I know what I'm doing, right? You're already laughing. Yeah.
Do you know what? I've been doing this so long, and I think I know everything, right? Like, I think there's nothing that can, like, nobody's going to pull it over my head. Nobody's going to get one by me. And still, I can look at a contract and think, oh my God, how did I miss that? Or why does that even have to be why does something like reselling rooms, for example, right? Like, the reselling of rooms that are not sold by your block, that should be a given that is counted in your favor if there is attrition, right? Yeah. That should be a given. Why does that have to be in my contract? I actually have, so I mentioned earlier that I have that addendum that I created with my legal team. That was created and finalized, I would say probably in September or October of 2022. I already have like 10 new items I need to add to it because I've had conversations with hotels, or I've heard other people say, oh, don't forget to put that in your contract. And I'm thinking, that is a common sense item. Why do I need to put that in my contract? So
Yeah.
you never know anything. But I think the best advice that I would give is, one, negotiating is fun. Okay. If you get a good negotiating partner in your salesperson, it's going to be a lot of fun. The other thing is, remember that the best way to create a relationship and a partnership with whoever your vendor is, whether it's a hotel or an audiovisual company or a general contractor for your exhibit hall or whatever, it doesn't matter. Remember that you want to establish a friendly and amicable relationship, right? It is not a battle. Don't go to battle. You have, stand up for yourself and fight for what you need and want. But remember that, at the end of the day, this person has some level of power over the product that you put out as an event organizer.
Yeah.
And you do not want an acrimonious relationship with them.
I think that's great advice, because you're essentially saying, like, don't let your ego get in the way, right? It's got to be a working relationship. At the end of the day, if the wrong person wants to make your life difficult, they can, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So trying to be fair, trying to be honest, but also playing the game of negotiating and saying, hey, like these are 10 things that are super important to us.
Yeah.
And then, if they come back and cross off 5, you're fighting for 3 of the 5, and maybe you leave off 2 and you move on, but you're starting with 10. That's why I love your addendum and your list, because you're getting right to the point of saying, hey, there's a standard contract that I'm sure you've seen 100 times, but here's 10 things that, like, I'm coming to the table with, and I want you guys to see it clearly and understand, and we're going to talk about them.
Yeah.
I think that's the addendum piece is probably advice that I would give to anybody listening, to say, go make your own about what matters. This way you're not forgetting or getting caught up in things that are minuscule or, not as important. Love that. What are some changes you've seen over the years, right? What are some differences now that maybe you're finding either important or less important, or they've gotten better or worse? It could be anything. Just some changes you've seen from maybe, say, now to like 2013 or 14 or 15.
I mean, obviously updates in technology are wonderful, whether it's the technology that you use for conference registration and tracking your attendees, or, obviously we had to all switch to virtual events. And now, for the organization that I'm with now, all of our big conferences are hybrid. They are live streamed to a virtual audience at the same time that people are sitting in the room, which is wonderful as well. Now, what's not wonderful is when the bandwidth doesn't work, right? Or,
of course,
we use a system called Conferences.io for polling and for chat or asking questions, for the virtual team people to ask questions to the speaker. And, sometimes that doesn't work or something fails.
Yeah.
So technology, I think the biggest change in all of the time that I've been doing this is the technology. And as we all know, for everything we use, whether it's, Windows or you use a MacBook or whatever, technology is wonderful, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah. No, I think technology I'm kind of a big component of, the concept of it. It really doesn't go backwards. So at some point you got to get really comfortable utilizing it. It definitely has its flaws and its, what it struggles per se, right?
Yeah.
Like exactly what you're talking about. And I would agree with you. Yeah. I mean, tons of technology changes which are only going to change even more with virtual, with hybrid, with the in-person, all of it together for sure. Where are you hoping things get better in events? Moving because COVID was a big reset, just for a lot of people. Where are you hoping, where do events, and maybe it's not in negotiating or back and forth between, hotels and things like that, but just in general, where are you hoping, or you're thinking things need to be better in events?
That's a really tough question, because I think the nature of a good event planner is that things can always be better, right? Okay, I delivered a great event and we had great survey results, but not, there's always those things that aren't going well behind the curtain. Like, we are the men behind the curtain, or the people behind, however, whatever. If we want to be gender neutral, I'm the person behind the curtain, right? I am the Wizard of Oz. Nobody knows that I'm there.
Yeah.
but I'm pulling all the strings in the background at all times. So did everything go perfectly? No. Everything went perfectly if nobody knows it went wrong but me.
You're right.
So, that's a philosophy that I do live by, is I don't really mind if things go wrong as long as I can fix them with nobody noticing. What would I like to get, I should answer your question. What would I like to see different or get better or update? I think a lot of I honestly would say I'd like to see hotels get more on board with providing certain types of technologies as part of their infrastructure and package. Like the days of charging $100,000 to provide Wi-Fi to all your attendees and, a few hard lines to ensure your presentations and videos work and that kind of thing. Those days should be over. That should be something that is hardwired into the buildings, and also should be able, and I shouldn't have to negotiate it in my contract either.
Yeah.
It should just be part of an everyday offering.
Yeah. We've talked about that a ton in trade shows. Cost of
that too.
Internet at trade shows is crazy sometimes, and that as venues, it should just, with technology these days, everything runs on Wi-Fi, everything. Wi-Fi has to be good. It can't, you don't have to buy it to be good. Like it just has to be good for mostly everything that's going on inside those venues. One thing I've thought for a long time, and I would love your opinion, not a long time, since we got out of COVID here, and I'd love your opinion on it, is I think it's interesting that like COVID was kind of the kick in the ass that virtual needed to really step up and be like, hey, this is doable. This is manageable. There's an avenue for this. There was this, riff as it came out of like, oh, is it going to take over face-to-face? No, it's never going to take over face-to-face. I've come to the conclusion they are just two totally different things, and they're both valuable to organizations, and they have to figure out how to run them both. But in the in-person event side, I am just a believer that people running events and the events, as a person who attends them, and then as a person who helps people, we do build outs and design for events and strategy for events, is really doubling down on the customer and the audience experience and what it looks like, because a lot of the things that they used to fly somewhere and stay and get out of their house for 3 days, they can now go get virtually. So, but the experience, the face-to-face, the networking, the relationships, the conversation, the interpersonal, the connection, right? That stuff, you can't get virtually. So that's something I've kind of thought is like that piece, the collaboration, the conversations, the things like that, to me are where events need to kind of double, triple down the in-person ones. Cause like I've been to a few where it's like too many speakers, too many speakers. And I'm like, I can listen to speakers on Zoom if you need me to, I'd love more collaboration, more network and more relationship building is something I'd like to see for the future a little bit.
So, I do think there's a trend to this creation of community out of events, right? So I think a lot of that has to, and I think you touched on that a little bit in saying, I don't want to be in session after session after session all day long. What I'd like is a little more time to interact, or maybe it's more roundtable type sessions where maybe there's a question on the table and you're addressing that question and how it affects your industry. There are many ways to do this. How do we create community following the event? And I think virtual is great for that, right? Like you could do little spin-off virtual things that people who attended that conference can have access to following it. But I think, one of the things I was thinking while we were talking is that, and I'm going to put on a former responsibility hat, is as an exhibitor and sponsor of an event, I never got any value out of virtual. I would have a whole team in the background waiting for those live chats, waiting for somebody to come into the virtual booth, right? I would spend a lot of time, building my virtual booth. and yet hardly had any interaction. And a lot of the reason that, over the COVID period that the company I worked for at the time would do the virtual events was really to be seen as showing support to the industry they were in as a whole, and not because they thought they were going to get anything out of it. And I think that's still a problem even now, right? Like we have a lot of exhibitors who want to do our show, who do, live events. They are really not interested in the virtual piece, because the people who are at home, even when we have breakouts and we try to get them interacting and stuff in between sessions, or, when you're at home, if you have a break, you're going to go check your email, you're doing work stuff, right? You are doing work stuff, or you're going to grab your lunch really quickly before you have to come and sit down again. You're going to, take a bio break or whatever, but you're really not taking that. Like, while we have a 30 to 40-minute break in the exhibit hall, you're not going in the virtual exhibit hall. Or if you do, you only have to do it one time, and you've probably then seen everything.
So I have this is a good conversation here. I have a few thoughts on what you said. So one is the breakout session style thing, the collaboration. I was a part of a few of these and absolutely loved them, where there was like 7 to 20 people in a room. Someone was like orchestrating the conversation. And it's tough to get that small of a number of people in a room. But if you can have multiple rooms and you can have industry leaders or people running these conversations, when you got these people into a room of like under 40 people, people would start talking. They would start having conversations. And if you're talking about an industry-wide problem that everybody knows, or something that people are curious about, people are raising their hands saying, hey, like, we use that software too, and this is what we did with it. Or, it was on that note of what you said about experience. I think that stuff makes great conversation even after the breakout, because a person will walk up to another person and say, hey, what you said in there was really smart. And then that develops a bond, a relationship. The virtual side of what you said about virtual sponsors and you having been one for an event and really not getting the value. I think during COVID, yes, it was, some people were doing it just because they felt like it was the right thing to do, right? But even now coming out of it, you have people who feel kind of the same way, like they're not gaining that value. And one thing that we've noticed from working with our customers and just these conversations we're having is they're just such different avenues. Virtual and in person are so very different, and mixing them is very, very tough. The experience of the person in the hotel with you is so that event for them is so different. And doing the virtual thing where a person dials in and they're watching and they're like, oh, they're going to go to the exhibit hall too. Like you said, it doesn't work. It's a struggle. So I think it's going to take maybe some creative thinking of like, okay, so what does a virtual sponsorship look like? Or, these platforms are getting very creative with what they can do virtually. So maybe it's like somebody like yourself talking to, I spoke with Jonathan Kazarian. He's the CEO of Excel Events, right? And that's what they do. They have a software. So maybe it's a discussion with him saying, hey, I got virtual sponsors. They don't want to do what we've done in the past. What kind of ideas do you have? What can we do for them? Because their experience and the virtual attendee experience is so far different. And I think that's a good example of like the question I asked you about what kind of change has to happen. That's a piece right there. Who's going to solve that? Who's going to give a sponsor, hand you money and virtually say, I want to do that, Bethany, 100%. I'm in.
Right.
That was great. I enjoyed that. What do I want to ask you next here? You've thrown some good stuff at me here. If you were teaching a class, right? If you were teaching a class on this stuff, if they had you teaching young, ambitious event marketers, event managers, director of event, all these titles, all this cool stuff. If you were teaching a class and you had 15 minutes to teach the class to some young people, what would you really want to convey to them?
Well, I guess there's a few things. One, when I was just starting out and somebody told me that I could do this for a living, I thought it was really glamorous. So one, it's not that glamorous.
It's Good.
So let's just get that little myth out of our heads.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun though, right? Like, and so something I tell everyone when we have like a briefing meeting before we go on site, when we have a big staff briefing, the last thing I say in my closing is remember to have fun, right? You're going to be on site 24, you're on call 24/7 when you're on site. You're with only your colleagues, no family, you're away from home. Yes, we have responsibilities, and yes, we have to work hard, and we get up really early in the morning and we go to bed the last at night, like we're the last ones out at night. But have fun with each other, have fun with the attendees, have fun with the conference. It's not, it shouldn't be arduous because it's not rocket science or, brain surgery. You don't have somebody, well, I shouldn't say we don't have people's lives in our hands, because sometimes, like in a way we do, right? Like we have to keep people safe. We are responsible for them when they are on site at our events. So I wouldn't be so light as that. But, so I guess 1, have fun. 2, it's not glamorous, but it is good. Or I wouldn't have been doing it this long, right? I would have had to find something else to do with my life.
It's a cool industry. It's a cool business.
It is really a cool business.
Yeah.
The fact that we are always number 5 or number 6 on the top most strenuous jobs, top 10 most strenuous jobs makes total sense. Because we do have to learn to pivot on a dime, right? Like change it, plan everything you can in advance, but remember that change happens in an instant. And your level of flexibility is very important. Your ability to flow with the changes and be think around a problem very quickly so that you can come up with at least 2 solutions to something, right? Like 2 options for how do I fix this in a split second. People don't realize how much brain power it takes, right? Like you can't not just anybody can do this. You do have to be a very good problem solver. You do have to be analytical. You do have to understand details and want to burrow into those details. And the other thing is you have to be courageous enough to be curious. Because what I mean by that is we are always asking questions by nature. We are the kind of people who are always asking questions because we are always thinking around a question or an issue or the event itself. We're thinking around all of the things that could happen, right? If somebody asks us for something. And so, like, for example, I have noticed over the years with many, many stakeholders in many, many organizations, they don't like when you start asking questions of, well, how many people are we going to have? And what's our target audience? And, what days do you really want to do this? And how long do you think this is going to last? Like people get because they haven't thought about those details. So that's what I mean by being courageous is when you see that people are getting frustrated with your questions, you just have to find a way maybe to rephrase it or remind them that, this is for the benefit of of the project they are giving you to do. And it's, you want to deliver the best product for them at the end of the day. And that these questions are not meant to make them defensive or make them feel like they hadn't thought it through. They're to help them think it through.
So when you're saying courageous enough to be curious and asking those type of questions, you're talking about these questions going to, when you say stakeholders, you're talking leadership at a company, correct? I really like that because I think a lot of times, I would hope that leadership wouldn't shoot down those smart questions, right? Why are we doing this? Who's really the audience? All because that's what a true event marketer is to me. It's like you said, there is a lot going on here. It is more complex than it does seem. And a true event marketer does understand the audience. They do understand the value that's being driven. They understand what success looks like at the event, after the event.
Yeah.
And I would definitely encourage anybody, yes, be courageous enough to be curious, ask the questions, ask the business questions, right? Events are a business channel. we would say, right?
Yep.
And it all ties back to business initiatives. Businesses have goals, they have initiatives, and events are a part of that marketing and sales mix.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you're asking smart questions like that, to me, it should be like a path to promotion town, but well, depends
But I
on,
think,
depends on the leadership.
especially because you were asking, what would I tell somebody young and starting out? When you're young and you see somebody get exasperated with you, you might get scared. Like that might frighten you, or might say, oh, well, I better back off because this person is so much more senior than me. And they're clearly being frustrated by me asking these questions. So that's why I say it's courageous to keep asking, because you have to burrow in or it won't be right.
I could not agree with you more on that one. What are some tips for selecting hotels? Like when you start, creating an event, what are you looking for out of a hotel, a location?
So, I mean, most of my North American events are very large. And so we have a limited pool to choose from. A hotel that can give us all of the sleeping rooms in just one hotel, or all of the right meeting space, exhibition space, separate lunch rooms, multiple offices that we need for our staff and things like that. So we are kind of limited. But if I was just talking in general, I would say, my preference is tier 1 and tier 2 cities, right? So, places that have good airlift, so lots of flights that come in, or at least if they're not a hub, they have good connections from a hub. Where I live personally, I have to connect wherever I go unless I'm going to New York. So connections don't frighten me. Whereas there's a lot of people who are like, I'm not doing that if I have to connect. And so that's very important, the transportation in and out of the city. I love to have things that have, things that are nearby, right? Like within a walkable distance and all that sort of thing, so that attendees have something to do after, or our exhibitors and sponsors who like to throw parties for the attendees, they have places to go that aren't necessarily in the hotel. People are tired of the hotel. They saw those 4 walls all day.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are good things to think about. And then, what's your goal? Do you want people to only be interacting with the other people in the meeting? Are you doing an internal meeting? Are you doing an external facing meeting? Is it a small, like sometimes we have very small invitation only meetings, right? Where, what's the best thing for that? Is that more like a retreat?
Yeah.
So, it really depends on the event, and that's where you need to be asking questions, right? Or you might have a stakeholder, someone in leadership who they just really like doing everything in one city or one specific hotel, or, that sort of thing. And that's what they want.
Yeah. I think the question piece that you're saying is really such a big thing for younger people who are not comfortable asking them, because they do have to have the full picture. They do need to understand what's going on. What are the goals? What does all that look like? Yeah. Because then it does lead you to selecting better. Even small things, selecting a better city, selecting a better hotel, selecting, the environment, the atmosphere, the tone of the event, all of that really probably stems from asking really, really good questions. I'm trying to figure last 2 questions here. I have a couple, but I want to make sure I ask the right one here. But what do you think the difference is between an event marketer and a great event marketer?
Oh, I guess it depends. I think that personally, I think the term event marketer is kind of murky, right? Is an event marketer a person who markets events, or a person in the marketing team who executes events?
I think the second thing you said. I don't think it's, like I would say it's a person like yourself, essentially, to a degree. It's a person, because events to me is marketing, right? It's a marketing channel. So it's an event marketer, because I think a lot of this stems from the difference. There's a difference between an event planner and an event marketer in my eyes. You know what I mean? So that's why but I see the murkiness of what you're saying for sure.
Well, I mean, I think a good event marketer, I guess, or a good event manager understands everything. So even like, for example, even though I don't do content and program planning,
Mhm.
I understand how important good content is. I understand that delivering that in the right time and in the right cadence is really important. And I also understand, that the right event design, and I am a part of the event design decisions, but the right event design is really, really important. So even though I am not the person making the decisions about those things, I am the person delivering those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think again, kind of goes back to that full 360 view, having the answers,
Mhm.
understanding the full scope of everything that's happening at this event, why it's being held, what the goals are, who's coming, what's all the, you know what I mean? How does this whole thing make sense to do? Because it's a huge production. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of
Mhm.
energy. So what's it all for? And if you can understand that,
And I think
I would have to agree with you.
ultimately we have to be seen as subject matter experts and go-to advisors for the people that we work with who have those pieces of the puzzle that we then have to grab holistically and bring them all together in like this orchestra, right? Like I often see myself as a conductor.
Tell me more about that.
So because I mean, okay, so I'll give the first time I ever felt like that, actually, I was doing a dinner for 600 people on the beach in Cancun. And I was watching all these vendors come in, the decor and the food. And I had people in the pools doing these beautiful flower arrangements, that like these floating flower arrangements. And I felt like I was literally standing there with my baton, like, you go next and you go next. And it was, that was what made me realize, like, I am an orchestra conductor. There's all these disparate, separate entities who come into an event, and the only reason that they are in harmony is because I told them what to do in advance and I planned it.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. I like that. I was curious when you asked that, because I think that's kind of a burden that event planners, event marketers, event directors, they have on them, whether they know it or not, is that they are coordinating, they are directing, they are the conductor. There's a reason the title often is director of events. You know, that's right. You know what I mean? Because there is a lot that goes into it. It is event planning. It is event marketing.
Mhm.
You know, it's all of those things come together. I actually wrote a post on this the other day on LinkedIn, and I just wrote that I'm baffled how some C-suite or big companies, they don't have experienced or a trained or a position where they're like, hey, we're going to go get a really good director of events, a really good event marketer, a brand experience. There's so many titles in that space, right? Whatever it is, but go get someone that's done this, that's gotten results from events, that's ran incredible events. A lot of times, especially in the trade show world, the person that you're having conversations with, they're like, oh, I've done this a couple of times. I mean, they just get thrown to the fire. And there is training, there is education, there is things for them. And, you know, when these budgets are 20 to 40% of total marketing spends, I just am shocked sometimes, like where we're like, hey, is there another person that you're getting this information for? And they're like, no, it's me. I'm like, wow, we got a lot of work to do, right? Which is fine, but I'm just always shocked. And then when I talk to people like yourself, or I talk to people like Sonia Murphy, Debbie Kemp, some of these great, I mean, Aaron McElroy, who works for IBM, who I'm talking to, it's like that next level of talent that is there to go execute events, to build trade show booths that produce results, to have events that have incredible experience that then produce results, is there. And sometimes I'm just blown away that companies aren't searching for it when they're spending big money on events.
Yeah. Yeah. We are terribly undervalued. And I have
Yes.
said in the past, glorified admin.
Oh,
We are
it's
considered
crazy to me.
glorified admin. But I think you're right. I think, you know, when companies are spending, I mean, some of my big trade show booths in, you know, when I was doing that, when that was my main role, were $1 million. And
Yes.
that didn't include, you know, on-site execution of the additional 200 people, you know, sales teams that were traveling, and the like meetings we had in conjunction. So we would have off-site meetings at hotels, you know, pre-event meetings with 200 staff on site, and all of the sleeping rooms that takes. And, you know, $1 million for a booth and space, that's a lot of money. And that is
Big
not
time,
even that much compared to what some of the big players
Oh,
are
some
spending.
crazy, there's some
Yeah.
crazy spends. Yeah, that's just one connect I've been trying to make and write about and see if I can get some response or conversation going on it, which is I've just noticed it, you know. I mean, not so much in these like large companies, although I will not say names, but I have seen some that I'm like, you are too big of a company
Right.
to not have this role or this person spearheading this, you know what I mean? Or that they're just not even there. And particularly when you move a little lower market, you know, you have a company spending $250,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 on trade show booth over one or two shows. I mean, that's a big spend depending on how big you are.
Mhm.
And that money's got to be, regardless of your revenue and profitability, like that spend's got to be worth it to you to return on it. That's
Yeah.
why you're there.
Yeah.
And they don't have people. And even if you have somebody young, I'm like, go get them training, go send them to the CTSM program at Exhibitor. There's
Yes.
other avenues. There's
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff where they're training people how to
Yeah.
do this work.
Yeah. So, and it's funny, but I would say that I have worked for a few companies that really value that level of expertise.
Good.
And one difference that I see very strongly between coming from the commercial world and my commercial background and now working for a professional association is that because the professional association relies so heavily on the execution of events as revenue, my team and I are highly valued by the organization. And so it's a big difference. But I had a text the other day from the executive assistant of a former CEO that I worked for. And in that role, I did actually work very closely with our CEO on a few of the events, which were his like invitation only to client type thing. So I worked with him on those, and I had a lot of access to him. And she sent me a text the other day and she wrote, "You're a legend." So I wrote back, "Why?"
I love that.
She said, "You've been gone. I left there in 2019. She's like, "He still quotes you at the marketing team."
Nice. That's good.
She said, "I've just heard him quote you 3 times.
Good. That's good stuff. Hey, that means you're doing something right. And you know, I'm glad you're at a place where you're valued and the work is valued. You know, I think the more that I talk to people and have these conversations and I'm just learning, I'm like, man, there really is some sharp, talented people out there. And there's a reason why events are so prominent, and that they did come back so strong, and that because there are people getting results, driving revenue, driving brand awareness, driving community, driving all of these things that are so important. And it takes, as you said, it takes a conductor, right?
Yeah.
Bethany, I have a closing question on my podcast. Okay. My closing question is, it doesn't have to be particularly event advice or anything like that. It is, what is advice to your younger self?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, if I was going to be flippant, I would say, don't do this, right? Don't go into this. You know, I've been through multiple recessions, and, you know, it's because events can be cut. Oh, we can slash that budget right out. Then the event person goes too, right? So, but I wouldn't say that. I would say, you know, looking back, it's been a great run. I have had amazing roles throughout my career. I've worked in numerous cities in so many different kinds of companies and organizations, and in many different aspects of the events industry. I would say probably one of the only ones I haven't worked in is the hotel industry. I haven't worked in a hotel.
Maybe you should go negotiate on the other side next.
No, no, I'm good. But so I think advice for any young person in any industry is be open to all experience, because all experience helps you grow. So even though there were times when I felt like, oh, I don't know if I can do this change, or, of course it's scary when you get laid off because your job has been eliminated, because your entire marketing budget, your entire event marketing budget's been eliminated. Of course, those things are scary, but I would say that every time I landed in a better position at a company, most companies that I've really enjoyed working at, and whether that was, changing because I was looking for a new job or changing because I was forced to be looking for a new job, all opportunities are good opportunities, and all experience is good experience, even when you don't feel like it is.
Half glass full. I love that. Bethany, thank you for coming on my podcast. You should be super proud of your career, like the work you've done, the roles you've had, the companies you've worked for. I love events. It sounds like you do as well.
I do.
And I think you shared some very important thoughts, experience, and information today. And I appreciate you coming on and doing it.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's actually been fun. So thank you.
I'm glad you had fun. Did you think it wasn't going to be fun?
No, but you're always nervous when it's not really public speaking. It's, but it's still nervous.
You did great. You know your stuff.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming on.
Okay.
That's a wrap, everybody. Thank you for listening to Event Marketing Redefined. I'm your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so much.